You are listening to KPPQ LP Ventura. Welcome to Creators Corner. I'm your host, Bob Telford. Creators Corner is a show that focuses on the arts, music, and theater and the people who make it. Ventura County is chock full of artists, and we hope to share their thoughts and journeys with you. So let's get started. Our guest today was born in New York and grew up in California. He professes to have always been creative. He's an avid reader who lives for books. He's largely self-taught, using libraries, museums, books, materials, and time. He loves classical art, truth, beauty, high concept, composition, refined skills, color, and line. He's been a model maker, printmaker, illustrator, musician, and composer. And he believes that late bloomers are the most exotic flowers. Please welcome to Creators Corners, Thomas Scott Nelson. Now, before we jump into this, I really have to ask you a question. Because you also have a motto here, which is making it up as we go along. Mm-hmm. That accompanied with the late bloomers, I have to ask, where did those two come from?
I've kind of always had those. It's if you're going to do something and somebody asks you, can you do this? And you haven't done it before, it's like, do I have enough in my skill set to proceed? And hopefully, yes. And you give me 24 hours, I'll find enough books to say, well, you do it this way.
Right.
To give me some background. And the late bloomers are, let's see, I'm waiting to be a 50-year overnight success any day now.
That is something that I think a lot of people live by, that mantra. They 50 years to become an overnight success is something I've heard many times by people. Yeah, well, listen, both of them, I think, are great mottos to live by. In my opinion, especially when you're into creative arts, because the minute you stop, you flatline.
Yeah. You've got to keep doing something new all the time.
Right.
I have another one you might like, which is specialization is for insects.
Specialization is for
I was
insects.
told early on that you either do the art or you do the music. You can't do both.
Wow.
And it's like, well, that's nice advice. I didn't follow it.
No, of course.
And as far as I can see, our goal is to be as broad and aware and sensitive as possible.
If we're not artists, because that's letting everything in instead of, blocking.
And then processing as best you can.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get into the heart and soul of this. So, obviously, you're a man of all art forms. So, what exactly put you on that creative path? Was there any, light bulb moment, or you just have always been interested in it? Is it curiosity? What exactly got it going for you?
I'm just fascinated by everything around me.
And that's healthy.
And I have always been that way.
Wow.
It's, the whole world is miraculous.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the thing, I think, that you need to have that openness. You need to be able to receive whatever's coming at you. You don't have to necessarily embrace it. Just be open to it.
And then there's the whole shiny thing. It's, look over here, shiny. I want to do some of that.
I'm guilty of that so many times. So in your bio, you indicated that you worked as a Disney Imagineer.
Yes.
Explain to the audience what exactly that entails.
It's essentially freelancing within a very open, very high-end corporate structure. Mm-hmm. I found it that almost everybody was wonderful. Bright, creative, mostly happy, interested in what they were doing. And there were a handful that would kill you to climb. But other than that, I got in there because a friend of mine was building architectural models.
Right.
And very high-end, acrylic, styrene, metal etching. We were using micrometers to check everything and calipers. And they sent painters to paint his models with buckets and brushes, and he went ballistic. So about 2 months after that, I was hired to come in and airbrush all of these models that he was building.
Wow.
At the time, I had not used industrial lacquers or airbrushing in that capacity. And it's like, can I do this? Sure, I can do this. And yeah, it worked out.
Wow. So when you were saying micrometer, so this is a very precise, but you were involved in the artistic aspect of it.
I was involved, everything from, well, as an example, we were working on Tokyo Star Tours.
Right.
And at the time, this is around 88, 89. Computers were coming on strong. The design departments were using CAD/CAM for everything. And at one point, we're building the pavilion for Tokyo Star Tours to scale to send. The Oriental Land Company is the owner of that park, and they would basically measure everything and blow it up 25 times, and there was what they were building. Well, my friend who's a genius with a table saw got annoyed with me because it's like, well, just start. And it's like, here, use this drawing. And this is after I've been looking at the drawings going, there's something not right here. And I tend to actually need to see it in my head, do the math, do the previs, so I know what's going to come up. And he's just genius with a table saw. You cut it here, you cut it there, a little bit more, it fits. Well, it turns out that the drawing that he handed me to actually build it off of was several feet off in the corner, and we built everything to match that as it went up, and the Japanese built it to match the building we built.
Oh, boy.
So, okay, the artistic side, engineering, I can do math, I can do art. You know, I have high school SATs, I got the sort of flat across, the scores. Got a D in trig in high school, hated it. 20 some odd years later, I'm building architectural models, and oh my goodness, trigonometry works. It's magical. You do the math, you cut it.
So I understand that you've also delved into other creative areas such as prop building, playing in a funk band, building point-of-purchase displays. Where does it end? I mean, it sounds to me like, and how do you wrap your head around all of these different things? I know you mentioned earlier that you just do it. Someone asks you if you can, and you do it.
Apparently, the gods were good to me. I'm fairly bright. I can mimic just about anything I need to. And I'd rather take it and twist it and make it my own.
Right. Instead of that fake it till you make it.
Well, you got to practice. You got to do stuff. Right. And at a certain point, you have to mean the line that you put down.
Right. Absolutely.
And then, I do life drawing every Thursday, typically. And lately, I'm doing life drawing with a ballpoint pen.
Interesting.
No erasing. I meant that line.
And so, in other words, your belief is that whatever line you're doing is accurate, and you're not going to second guess yourself.
No, it's as good as I can do at the moment.
Again, I use the incorrect word, accurate.
It's an interpretation.
Exactly, which is what art is.
Yes, always.
If you think about it,
And okay, if you're doing drawing, your drawing is not what you are drawing. It is its own entity, and it has its own rules and demands as you go along.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. So you mentioned the ballpoint pens, and I know that you, in your bio, mentioned that you have worked with a series of different mediums.
Yes.
A vast number of them, as a matter of fact, some that I had not even ever heard of.
Well, this gets back to when somebody asks, you're a painter, and I say, no, I'm an artist. And then it's an artist, capital A. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, draw, paint, sculpt, compose, play multiple instruments, write. I'd like variety. Yeah. And each one informs the next one.
Right. And you mentioned that you were in a funk band.
Long ago and far away.
Yes. Okay. Is that something that you just said that's a part of another life? Or do you still appreciate playing an instrument? Or?
I play all the time. In fact,
what do you play?
I play keyboards, I play guitars, I played bass, I played French horn as a youngster, wow. I played saxophone, flute at folk masses in the 60s and 70s. Typically these days I like playing MIDI horn.
Gotcha.
which is a synthesizer.
Yeah, no, those are actually fascinating.
Yeah, and that's a 30-year-old technology.
Yeah, yeah. And the musical part of your life, was there someone in your growing up that
Yes.
influenced you musically, and who might that have been?
Well, one of the owners of Dante's, a jazz nightclub in North Hollywood, lived with my family when I was about 12 for probably 6 months. Very interesting guy. He had been a Marine. He was a dancer and was tormented in the Marines for being a dancer. We have a dancer amongst us. So he took up boxing. But he was in things like the big musicals of Hollywood in the late 50s. Pal Joey, Pajama Game, those kinds of things.
Sure.
Muriel cigar commercials, if you remember those by any chance.
Oh, yeah.
He was in those.
Yeah.
And so when he lived with us, we had all of West Coast jazz happening, on the stereo. And I grew up listening to a lot of jazz. This is after being in band and orchestra, and older brother and sister who are also in band and orchestra.
Right.
My parents loved big band music and going to shows in theater. They were from New York. No, music has always been very, very important.
Yeah, and I think music is one of those things that it's an art form that I think influences everything else that we do in our lives. So it's actually a great aspect to have as a part of your artist sphere, as it were. Now I've seen some of your pieces, and that's how we first met, was during Art Walk here recently in Ventura, and all I could think was, what is his process? And I say that only because the precision, the detail is just phenomenal. And so let's talk a little bit about that. When you first of all, when you decide that you're going to do a painting like what you're currently doing, where do you start?
First, I bother somebody and tell them that I think you would make a great painting, and can I? Will you let me? Mm-hmm. And they kind of look at me like I'm crazy. Is this going to cost them anything? No, it doesn't cost you anything until I'm done, at which point for you alone it's so much. Anybody else, it's based on how many hours I've put in on it.
Right.
And typically it's usually way more than you're going to get it for. I will approach them. If they say yes, I will arrange a photo shoot, and I will shoot 100 to 200 or even more photographs. And then I will select from that the ones that, for want of a better term, talk to me, or arouse an emotional response. I like this face. I like this gesture in the hands. And I will play Frankenstein with bits and pieces within a program like Photoshop. And once I start playing Frankenstein, I create a composition that I find interesting, that say I like this torso, but I like that head better. I will mix the two. I want this hand. I want to move it over a bit. It will look better if it's set in a different position or rotated. And then because I do so much life drawing, I have a pretty good grasp of the underlying anatomy and can, string them together and make it work. Once I have my Photoshop mock-up of what I want, I will go and pull line work out of that. I will make my coloring book, as it were. I will print it to scale and decide if that's really the size it works at. If it isn't, I'll print it again at a slightly different scale. I will take a tracing off of that. I will transfer to a panel that I have built that tracing. I make my own carbon paper, as it were. I use charcoal. I will put it on the back of tracing paper, put it down, put the drawing I want on top of it, and trace through to transfer it. Sometimes I strengthen the lines, sometimes I don't. And then I have a very large monitor in my studio. I'll bring up the images and, I will start painting. I will do underlayers and then gradually more and more and more. Right. And it's kind of silly. I call it an underpainting, and it's an underpainting until it's done.
Yeah.
And it's done when it's looking back at me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there's another aspect of your pieces that fascinates me, and that is, and I'm going to use the word surreal because in my mind, when I look at the backgrounds, they do have a surreal feel to them. And I got to ask, who were your influences in that? Because a lot of people will say, "Oh, Dali," or there's a couple of others, and I can't think of their names off the top of my head.
Max,
right?
There's
Exactly.
a bunch of them.
Yeah, were those influences for you in your art? Where did that come from?
Do you remember the Time Life series on art?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my sister, who's got a decade on me, basically got all of them.
Wow.
And I just started reading all of them. And, so I have a rather broad sense of what went on in art history.
Right.
I drove art history teachers nuts. Fast aside, Madame Monet with a green stripe down her face, and the teacher pontificating, well, he's doing it this way because of these color theories and optical theories. And I'm like, excuse me, was he happy with her that day? Was there an extra bottle of wine on the table? Did he put out too much green paint and was frugal? Was he happy with her that day? just to say. I think the theory comes long after the fact. We do work, we develop it as best we can, and in his case, that would have been how I would see it.
Yeah.
As far as surrealism, when I first started doing art in college, we were caught in abstract expressionism. This was like late 60s, early 70s.
Sure.
And pop art.
Right.
Nobody was teaching anything traditional at the time. And my skill level was such that, I can do kind of impressionist stuff. And as my skill set I worked my way back through surrealism and Dada and, impressionism. And then as my skill level got stronger, I started really liking the more classical artists that, near as I could tell, can draw and paint better than anybody we have today. Right. Pretty much. That's not entirely true, but they're not revered for it.
Right.
We will revere somebody like Van Gogh, who remarkable output, very interesting style and manner of painting, but the man was not quite well.
Well, and he also struggled, I think, in terms of trying to find what it was that he was best suited to do.
Well, he initially wanted to be a preacher.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out. And
right. Because his father was a preacher, am I right?
I'm not sure about that.
It seems to be. Yeah, it seems to me in one of the books that I had read that he was a preacher. Yeah,
which, as another weird aside here, the whole modernism versus classicism and how the classical stuff is considered sentimental and schlocky and academic.
Right.
Well, a large part of that comes out of the history of France in the 1700s and the early 1800s.
Huh.
The classicism was attached to the monarchy, and the modernism was attached to the New Republic.
Wow.
Who ultimately prevailed.
So you had mentioned that when you were taking art classes, so you did take art classes at some point.
Cal State Northridge.
Ah, good for you.
I got in there when it was still Valley State College.
Yeah, I know it well.
$90 full semester load.
Yeah, I think, when was it, 69 or 70? 70 that they changed over. Maybe it was 71 or 72.
Probably 70s. Yeah, I had got out of high school in 71.
Right. So basically, did you do a full 4-year program, or?
I never graduated.
No, yeah.
I'm a hothead.
Yeah.
This is my portfolio. You like this? If you like this, hire me. If you don't like it, fine, I'll go find somebody else.
So back to the forms that you've been currently that you're working in, the attention to detail. It's one of those things where obviously that must take you a tremendous amount of time.
Yes.
And I guess for me, I always have an issue with the discipline that goes into spending a lot of time on one thing. How do you cope with that?
Usually it's been driven by local art shows.
Right.
I need a piece done by this day. I have this much more to do on it. I better get busy. And I keep a running journal of how much time I'm spending on every piece.
Right. Right.
And it's like, okay, if I do the math, I have to be here 7 hours a day for the next 2 weeks. I guess I'm here 7 hours a day painting.
Right. And back to that, there was one other question that I did want to ask you with regards to the backgrounds. And I know you did tell me about this briefly when we spoke during Art Walk, and that is that you find yourself creating a background that is representative of the energy that comes from the individual that you're painting. Is that correct? Or
That's close enough. I like the context for the portrait.
right.
And, what do they do with their time in their life?
Right.
And try and find something that resonates with that.
Right, because for example, I'm going to use the machinist, the two
Yes.
big gigantic gears in the background, and then the welder.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about the welder, and you had brought this up to me, that you weren't quite comfortable with the perspective, the depth of
Well, it's not real.
but that's okay.
No, it's okay. It works with the painting.
Yeah, exactly.
But, we have a window in the background, but we have the floor that goes way beyond the window.
Right.
And it's impossible.
And then you have the other woman, which is sort of like I don't know what you would, very spiritual is the only word that I can think of. And the background that you've created for her almost has a ghosting image to it, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's energy patterns.
Yeah.
She does sound baths.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Okay, so she has the Tibetan bowls, which she hits and rings, and then
Right.
keeps them going like wine glasses.
Right.
And when I realized if you did this painting and put it at eye level, the tops of the bowls would all be flat lines, which they wouldn't read as bowls, and you wouldn't know what they were.
Right, exactly.
So what really matters is the energy given off by them. So I started playing with high school physics. You drop a pebble in the pond, it ripples out like this. You drop two, the ripples interact in a certain way, and they amplify each other or they diminish each other.
Right.
And I then also figured it was a sort of new agey piece, so we did it all in rainbow colors as it goes around. And the nimbus halo behind her head is in rainbows, but in the reverse order.
Right.
And yeah.
It's fascinating that you use the different aspects of your brain to come up with those, with the ideas.
I feel that every new work is informed by all the previous work I have done and all of my previous experiences, and mix and match and lift from all kinds of places to come up with the next piece that I do.
Right. Now, the other thing that we absolutely cannot ignore, and that is you actually not only paint these, but then you create frames specific to each individual piece. Talk about that, would you?
Okay, well, the lady with the sound bowls.
Right.
The shape of the frame for that, it's 4 feet by 3 feet overall, but it is not quite an egg shape. It's not an oval. It's not a parabolic curve. It's not a circle. I basically, when I was designing this piece, laid a big piece of tracing paper over it and came up to it and said, I want this curve which contains the figure.
Wow.
I then took a photograph of that, brought that into my computer, into a CAD program, scaled it to where I wanted it, fared a curve through it that was mathematically correct, offset it to say, well, the frame will be this thick, decided where I would have to chop this to put in splines, and dumped that out as prints and, traced that down onto the wood that I was working with.
Right.
And did the initial cuts with a bandsaw and a router to give it shape. And I, glued the whole thing together, and it works.
Wow.
I did, when I was in college, I took every art class there was, at least the first one. And I really liked wood design. That was fun.
Right.
Not as a technician, but more as someone that, well, how can I bend these machines to create something I would like? And I wanted to get away from everything that was rectilinear.
Yeah.
So I did a cradle, which is currently in Minnesota. I shipped it to my son back a month ago.
Right.
I had built it 50 years ago for my niece. She's 51 this time around the clock.
Wow.
And everything is round.
That's amazing. Now, the other pieces that I'm familiar with were not done with a wood frame.
I also, like the Machinist, I made a frame out of extruded aluminum. It even has a handle on it because it's too wide to carry around otherwise.
I know, I saw that.
And he's a machinist, so why not?
Yeah, I saw that, and I was like, wow, how many people would have thought of that?
Well, it worked really well.
I know that social media is a big part of everybody's lives nowadays. So if our listeners wanted to, get to know you more or follow your work, or maybe they're interested in actually purchasing a piece or whatever, do you have websites, social media sites that people can visit to kind of get a sensibility of who Thomas Scott Nelson is and what he's got going on?
Well, I have like 7 different websites. One sort of my ongoing one that I work with all the time, which is tsnelson.net. Mm-hmm. There's a button at the bottom of the page that says portraits, which gets you to a page of eyeballs, which gets you to figurative portraits. I do have a more important one, thomasscottnelson.com, which is on, Fine Artists Online. I'm not maintaining it nearly as well as I should. Mm-hmm. It has a few of my pieces. I really don't do Instagram or Facebook or any of that. Thousand Oaks Art Association keeps putting my stuff up. That's kind of a nice thing.
Right.
But the easiest, most effective way to reach me is email, which would be my initials, TSN, as in Thomas Scott Nelson, at tsnelson.net.
Makes sense.
And that said, I would love to do commission portraits.
Yeah, awesome. Now, I cannot forget this because this is an event that most recently you alerted me to, and that is that you were honored by an organization for a piece of art that you submitted. Was it a competition or?
Oh, I'm a member of the Thousand Oaks Art Association and the Westlake Village Art Guild. They have, both of them have a members show and a juried art show each year. Last year, the gentleman with the gear behind his head that you mentioned got Best in Show. This year, I'm not sure what I'm putting into that show. That'll yet to be determined. At the Thousand Oaks Art Association's juried open show in the summer, I got a Best in Show for Bobby and Coco, Best Friends Forever. And I also got first place oils for the portrait of Dexter. And most recently, I got first place oil painting for the Mejia family, which is in the Thousand Oaks Members Show.
Wow.
Which is at the Community Gallery on Borchard Road next to the Newbury Park branch of the Thousand Oaks Library.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
So
that's always great, and I say this, many artists will say, well, I don't do it for the accolades. Anything else that you want to share with the audience before we sign off here?
Oh, you should have asked me that to think about before I arrived.
Nah, that's okay. It's one of those things. I always feel like it's my duty to ask that question because sometimes, even though I do some research beforehand, it's like I don't know that I necessarily have asked all the questions that some of my guests might want me to ask.
Well, with that said, I have 3 snarky requests. Should you have said something like, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" And those, I'm told they're all impossible. One is world peace.
Oh.
The other is rational leadership.
There you go.
And the third one is satisfying sex for everyone.
Ah, well, yeah, those are 3 that I unfortunately don't have the kind of control over other individuals that might make that possible.
Yes, but basically... we're living through a melodrama. It's okay. We're going to get through it. Yeah. It'll be fine.
Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself.
Or one last thought is the I Ching. Are you familiar with that? Chinese Book of Changes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The one I like is make energetic progress in the good.
I like that a lot, and that's a great way to end this interview. I thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Thomas Scott Nelson, for being a part of Creator's Corner.
My pleasure.
What an amazing time we've had. I can't wait to share our next guest with you. Many thanks to Caps Radio and KPPQ LP Ventura. So until next time, stay safe, be well, and have fun. See ya. This is KPPQ LP Ventura.